Hi, everyone. Good evening. I'm Karen Friedman Quinn, one of the adult programming people here at the library. And I just want to welcome you here tonight for a program that we're co-sponsoring with the Wilton Youth Council. And we're very happy to coordinate with them on these informative programs. I'd like to just make one announcement on the part of the library. We're having a program on March 24th, which is a combination of a celebration of Women's History Month and an author talk with Jodi Kantor. She is the Pulitzer Prize winning journalist who was one of the journalists who brought the Harvey Weinstein story to the public, among other notable things that she's done. And now she has written a book called How to Start, which is an outgrowth of her speaking at the Columbia University undergraduate graduation last year, when they were going through a bit of political turmoil. I'm sure you read about what was going on in the news. And she noticed that the students were not interested in hearing about the politics of what was going on. What they were most interested in was in their searching for a career. And these were graduates of with a four-year degree. And she talks in her book about ways of going about looking for a job in today's climate where there's a lot of contentious rhetoric going on. A lot of people are reading that there are fewer and fewer jobs out there because of AI and a lot of other things that are happening. And she comes up with some pretty interesting ways for people looking for their first job to find them and to have some joy in their future career areas. So I hope that you will be interested in joining us. It's a Tuesday evening in March 24th. Program begins at 7, and we'd appreciate if you would register for that on our website. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Kim Hall, who's the chair of Wilton Youth Council, to introduce tonight's speakers.
Hi there, thanks for coming out tonight. I think it's a miracle it's not another snow day. I think we're all kind of tired of the snow days at this point. I wanted to thank the library for their partnership, as well as Susan and Deena and the Wilton High School PTSA, who are all partners on this program. I'm delighted to introduce our speakers, but first we have a little light housekeeping that we always need to do. The first is that I am obligated to remind you that Wilton Youth programs are for informational purposes only. They don't constitute medical advice and are not a substitute for professional advice, diagnosis, or treatment, nor is this presentation a venue for individualized therapy or college counseling. Last but not least, the main portion of this program, so their speaking portions, is being recorded. And so we're going to hold the questions and answers for the end so that that portion is not recorded, to give people who have questions a privacy of the people in the room instead of whomever may see the recordings after the fact. So now I'm very happy to introduce Dr. Susan Bauerfeld and Deena Maerowitz. Susan is an experienced clinical psychologist who has been providing education and support to parents raising children in the Fairfield County area for a number of years. In her private practice, which she retired from in 2024, She worked with adults and teens struggling with anxiety, trauma, learning challenges, and health issues. And right now, we're really excited for her upcoming book, Base Camp Parenting. This book, co-written with Chris Parent, is focused on helping readers learn how to break free from worry's grip and raise more confident, resilient children who can cope with life's many challenges. It'll be out in October, and I'm pretty sure she'll be back here at some point to talk about that as well. Deena Maerowitz, who is both a JD and MSW, provides college and graduate school advising for the Bertram Group, where she has guided many families through this process. Her clients rely on her expertise as a former associate director of admissions at Columbia Business School and her skills in helping students learn to advocate and position themselves in the admissions process so that they find colleges where they can thrive. So without further ado, I'd like to hand it over to Susan.
Okay, am I on? Yeah. Okay. So I'm thrilled to be back at the library and very grateful that the library, Deena asked me, I think I've been doing some version of this talk for over 10 years. I'm really grateful that the Youth Council continues to ask me back. So I live in Stamford now and am not seeing clients regularly on an individual basis, but still active in programs like this. So this is why you're here, right? You want a good life for your children. And college seems to be essential to that good life, right? So I wanted to start with this just to say that, you know, I am confident that everyone in this room has this as their ultimate goal. Okay? And that's why you do what you do. You want your children to have a good life. But let's just, and one other thing I want to mention, I am highly aware that you're probably far more eager to hear what Deena has to say than what I have to say, because what I'm going to talk to you about is what you can do in your home to support your kids that really has nothing to do with college, but has everything to do with them having a good life. And then Deena will talk to you about the nitty-gritty of getting through the process. In my opinion, this is an essential part, what I'm going to talk to you about getting through the process. And it's a part that we often don't give enough attention to. Okay, so first we're going to talk about some beliefs surrounding the college process, okay? First one, you know, admission to a top school is necessary for a good life. Hey, how many of you feel like that's a cultural message you really get? And you're sort of like, yeah, that's obvious. The next one, achievement equals success. Can't succeed without achievement. This is another cultural message we have. And then this college thing is the big stuff, right? The kids are like, oh, it's such a big decision and it means everything. It's going to change your life. It's like so much credence given to it. So this is the cultural soup that you and your children are swimming in. It's real and it affects both of you. Even if you are trying to buck this in your home, they're swimming in it at school. They're swimming in it on the internet. They're swimming in it with, you know, with their peers outside. So, you know, this is what you're up against in some ways, and it can easily take over. If you're not mindful, all of this can become the top priority. And you know what this is that the last part is that your job, this is base camp down here, your job is to get them there, right? To do everything you can possibly do to get them up to that top place. I usually stand up, but I hurt my foot, so I'm sorry I keep looking back. Okay, so what are the predictors of a good life? Okay, when you're in this process, it seems like college is it. Like we got to get the college thing done or the good life's not going to happen. But what are the predictors? Now, there's been a very long-term study at Harvard University where they've studied people across their lifespans for a very long time. I don't even know how many years. I think more than 80 years some of these people are that they've been studying. And the researchers, Waldinger, I think it is, and Schultz, wrote a book called The Good Life with the findings from this study. So the biggest finding was that relationships and connectedness are really the biggest factor that contribute to long-term health and well-being and a good life. So I'm going to say that again. Relationships and connectedness matter a lot when it comes to having a good life. And also mattering. Jennifer Wallace was here talking about her book, Never Enough, a couple years ago. She has a new book out on mattering. I haven't read it yet, but I'm confident enough that it's great that I'm going to recommend it to you. So mattering is the sense of feeling valued and adding value. These two factors contribute more to a good life than anything else. Yet, how often is this part of the college process? We often don't focus on it. Sometimes lip service, but not a lot. Okay, so resources, base camp resources, what you provide for your kids. There are two types, they're both important. Okay, there are material resources and what I call non-material resources. Okay, material resources are things like food, housing, school, okay, college, schooling, books, textbooks, those kinds of things. Things that money can buy. We tend to focus more on these resources because they're easy to measure. You can easily see, okay, I did that. You can check off the box. You know, it's much easier to keep track of these, to measure them. And they are important. If you don't have enough food, you don't have a good life. Okay? If you don't have enough to eat, or if you don't have adequate shelter, you don't have a good life. They are important. And they communicate to children when you provide them. We provide for you, okay? And we're invested in you. Really important for kids to feel, right? You know, who doesn't want to feel like they're being provided for and invested in? And then we have non-material resources. And these are, I'm a practitioner of IFS, internal family systems, and this is what Dick Schwartz calls self-energy, if anyone's familiar with IFS. But these qualities, connectedness, calmness, compassion, okay, these are non-material resources that are also super important. And they communicate to children, you know, you matter. And that idea of mattering is so important. So both of these are important. And now we're going to look at their relative contribution to a good life or to happiness. So you need enough of the material resources to, you know, meet basic needs, and I like to say, and even a little cushion. But once you get there, the additional value that more money, more clothes, a better school, once you get to that point that's located here with the green, levels off. You're not any more happy with more money once you have enough to meet basic needs. Now, our culture tells us otherwise, right? Our culture just wants more, more, more. Okay, one of the analogies we use in our book is that if you are climbing Mount Everest, you need one really good backpack to make it up there. If you have 20 more in the closet, they don't add anything to the climb. Okay, that one you have on the way is what you need and use. These non-material resources, however, their incremental value to a good life to resilience, to long-term health and well-being is huge and keeps on giving throughout the lifespan. It does not level off the way that the material resources do. Now, again, I want to point out, both are important. I'm not trying to diss the material resources. You do need those, and they are important. But with those cultural messages I was talking about before, we tend to focus so much more on the material ones than these non-material. And I'm hoping when you come away from what I have to say tonight that you're able to prioritize a little bit more in your home some of these non-material resources. Okay, so when I talk about a base camp, that's your home environment. That's where your kids go out into the world and then they come back to talk to you about what happened and process it and figure out what they need and to go back out there again. So that's why we're calling this base camp. And maintaining one with these qualities that communicates to children you matter, and not that your achievements matter, but you matter, is really important. And the reason it's important, it really buffers the impact of adverse events that happen. Okay, it can't make them not happen, but it can really buffer the impact of it. And, that's your job, right? Although culture messaging, your job is to take away all those adverse impacts. Well, P.S., if you haven't figured this out, you can't do that. But you can buffer the impact of what happens to your kids. Also, when you have these qualities, these non-material resources, your influence with your kids increases. When your relationship is strong in this way, your influence is much greater. And you only have influence if you think you have control. I hate to burst your bubble, but you don't have any. Okay? All you have is influence. And your influence comes through your relationship, and you have more influence when your relationship has all these non-material resources. And the contribution, as you saw on that graph, is huge. It really contributes to long-term health and well-being. So this is a quote from The Good Life. I'm not going to read it because I hate when people do that when I'm attending a talk. But basically what this slide is saying is that, these material resources are important. They're not insignificant, but our focus on them tends to shift our priorities. So the reason this is part of the college talk is that when the college process begins to become the top priority, then attention to these other aspects of your base camp get overshadowed, get pushed to the side. And again, I'm not saying any of you who find yourself in this position are bad parents. The culture is really shoving us all in that direction. So the point of this is not to say tisk, tisk, tisk. The point of this is for you to be aware so you can keep these other priorities top of mind. And when that priority shifts, okay, when the college process becomes the top priority, kids really suffer. And there's data to support this. Kids really suffer because all those other avenues toward relationship, toward the things that contribute to a good life, are not prioritized. So, the top risk factors, this I'm going to warn you if anybody has a trigger warning or needs that. I don't love that term, but this is a bit sobering, this slide. Okay, the top risk factors for teen mental health. And this is national, but I believe it's also been validated across the world. Poverty, abuse, discrimination. Anyone know what the next one is? Excessive pressure to achieve. Just let that sink in for a minute. Look at, it's up there in the World Health Organization with poverty, abuse, and discrimination. Now, I am confident nobody in this room is setting out to put their kids' mental health at risk. But excessive pressure to achieve puts kids' mental health at risk. And the reason I'm talking to you today is that if you can shift your priorities to your relationship with your child in the way I'm talking about, you can buffer the impact of this culture. And it's really important to do, in my opinion. Okay, so what's the problem with excessive pressure to achieve? It interferes with connectedness and mattering. If we circle back, what are the prime factors that contribute to a good life? Connectedness and mattering. Excessive pressure to achieve interferes with those. So even though we have this cultural push, college is necessary for a good life. I got to get them into a good college. I got to do everything I can to support them to get them there so they have a good life. Okay, if the way in which that's happening is excessive pressure to achieve, you're interfering with the factors that actually contribute more to a good life. Okay, children come to believe that their achievements matter to you more than they do. How many of your kids have said something like that? Mom, you care more about my grades than you care about me. Has anybody heard anything like that? Okay, good. That's good if you haven't heard that, okay? But, you know, often kids will tell me that. They will tell me, you know, it feels like my parents have invested all this time and energy into tutors and courses, and they just, you know, they care more about that than they care about me. So I'm happy to see that your kids are not reporting that. Okay, and then often this excessive pressure to achieve is driven by parental worry. Okay, it's not bad parenting. It's not like child abuse, in my opinion. It is driven by worry, and we live in a culture where worry is the norm. Okay, worry has become a coping skill, but hello, worrying is not coping. So how does this happen? How does worrying about stuff lead to excessive pressure to achieve? So we have up here a parent who's talking about stuff. Stuff is situations that have uncomfortable feelings and facts. So here's some of the stuff. You know, my kid's just not interested. All the mail's coming in, they never look at it. Their grades aren't really what they need to be. They're only getting B's. Or they're, you know, and they've got a C in there. Maybe that's not so great. Or they're reaching too high. Some kids are so pushing themselves so hard that they're reaching too high. Or they're missing deadlines. So all of these things are valid concerns, right? If this stuff is going on and you're working in the college process, being concerned about all this stuff, reasonable. Really reasonable. But worrying about it is another matter altogether. And when you start worrying about it, you go, oh no, whoops. Maybe, what if, maybe they won't get in. Okay? And when that happens, then you get, oh no, I have to make sure. Whenever you have that refrain in your head, you can be pretty confident worrying is involved. I've got to make sure. I've got to make sure that they get to the tutoring session. I got to make sure they spend, 4 hours a day on X, Y, and Z. I got to make sure they get recruited. Okay? the making sure that is driven by the worry, in my opinion, is a lot of what drives this excessive pressure to achieve, not only from parents, but inside kids as well. So let's talk about what happens in the brain when you worry. In years past, I've said, I'm going to take this part out, and everybody goes, no, leave it in. We've got to have this in. So this is going to be a very brief overview, oversimplified version of the brain. So we're going to talk about two areas of the brain that are in the circles there. So we've got the lower part of the brain, the limbic system. This is where your amygdala is. This is the area of the brain that's responsible for fight, flight, freeze. Everybody knows what fight, flight, freeze is, right? Does anyone not know? Okay. So this part of the brain, reactive, impulsive, it saves your life if your life is in danger. Again, an important part of the brain. We need this part of the brain. It's always scanning for threats and fully online very early in development. And, acts the same way throughout development. Threats there, we're gonna, shut down the rest of the brain and we're gonna either fight, freeze, or flee. And then we have the prefrontal cortex. Okay, this is the part of your brain that executive functions lie in. Okay, if you have any kids with learning challenges, you know all about executive functioning, right? This is where our regulation occurs. When this part of the brain is accessible, this is when you are capable of coping, capable of problem solving, capable of connecting and forming relationships, capable of caring, capable of compassion. When the lower part of the brain is in charge, that part of the brain could care less whether you're a caring individual. That part of the brain is just trying to save your life. Again, if you're in danger, you want that part of the brain. It's not a bad part of the brain. It's limited in what it does. So the ability to cope with stuff, which relies on that front part of the brain. Oh, and it was on the slide, but I forgot to mention that part of the brain, not fully on board till the age of 25, and if you have any kind of ADHD learning challenge, you're pushing 30 before the hardware for functioning, a fully functioning adult is on board. So your 16, 17, 8-year-old, 18-year-old, not there yet. Not consistently there yet. Some of it's there, but not consistently there yet. But we need that part of the brain in order to cope. Okay? And coping with stuff is really an important life skill that worrying gets in the way of. And this is where I bring in Jon Kabat-Zinn, because this is one of my favorite quotes. And one of the reasons I like it so much in this context is what worry wants you to do is stop the waves. Okay? Helicopter parenting, lawnmower parenting, all those trends in parenting, what they want to do is stop the waves, get rid of all the stuff. But really what your kids need more is help with surfing, learning how to surf, learning how to manage that stuff, learning how to deal with all that stuff, not just get rid of it. So when you're coping with stuff, you have this two-way relationship. Okay? This part of the brain helps you notice concerns, things that are worth paying attention to. Okay, all that stuff in the bubble before, maybe the grades aren't as great as you'd like them to, or you think your kid is capable of, or maybe they're missing deadlines. Valid concerns. This is bringing your attention to it. But when you can then go up here and go, okay, what am I going to do about that? How am I going to cope with that? You've got this two-way street going on. When you worry, however, you're in a reactive mode. The brain is in a very different state. You react in alarm to stuff. And when that happens, you lose access to all the resources in the frontal lobe of the brain and all those non-material resources. They don't live in that part of the brain, but this process affects it nonetheless. So this is why worry is problematic. Because not only does it lose access, but this is a really expensive response in the body. If you're in fight or flight, if your kids are in fight or flight, you know, there's an epidemic of anxiety. I'm sure at least half the kids of parents in this room are anxious, okay? Going into fight or flight at least once a day, that's exhausting. Okay, fight or flight really is an expensive response of the body. It's what allows, like, a mother to lift a car off of a child. And when your body is doing that for a paper cut, it's really inefficient, and it's not in anybody's best interest. Okay, so we call in our book what happens when you worry the warp effect. You become racked with worry, angsty and anxious, reactive, and we used to say pooped, but our editor doesn't like that, so we now say profoundly tired. So how helpful do you think you are to your child when you're warped? How helpful are you to yourself when you're warped? Not. But this is what worry does to you. So being able to shift away from the worry, to shift the priorities, to access that part of the brain, even when something challenging is happening, is super important. And the warp effect shifts your base camp. You're not as available. Okay? It goes from this responsive, with compassion available, with being able to problem solve, to a very reactive state. And I like to say, when you have a relationship with worry, really hard to have a relationship with anybody else, because worry dominates. And worry will tell you, you must, you should, you have to. And when you're listening to that, there's not a lot of room to listen to other things. Okay, so what do you do about this? Okay, and I meant, get your shift together. Okay. So shift. We're all gonna worry. You're all gonna worry during this process. I just heard my English teacher say, don't say gonna. That's my critic part, tracking what I'm saying. But it's natural through this process. If you see your kid really struggling, overworking, or dreaming about something that you can't afford or that's out of reach for them, it is very natural for you to be concerned and to have some worried thoughts. Okay, I'm not telling you here to, completely not worry, but when you catch yourself worrying, what I hope you will be more mindful of after hearing this is being able to shift away from the worry so that you can have that other kind of brain state and not that activated brain state with that, roundy guy freaking out. So how do you do this? I often do a whole hour-and-a-half lecture on what I'm about to show you, but we're going to do it in about a minute. So the first thing you want to do is notice, name, and normalize what's going on. And by normalize, I'm not saying you say it's okay. It's more, how reasonable is it, given what's going on, that I am feeling what I'm feeling, or that my kid is feeling what I'm feeling. So, if you've had it with, nagging, and things still are not getting done, how reasonable is it that you feel frustrated, annoyed, and angry? Reasonable. When we talk in terms of parts, when you do this, you let the part that's feeling that know you heard it. You heard what it had to say. You're paying attention. And when you do that, when you name feelings, there's research for this, and there's a saying that neuropsychologists have, when you name it, you tame it. The arousal around the feeling subsides. So you're beginning this process of regulation here. The next step is evaluate, and what you're evaluating, and these are all the acronym NEXT, and it's what to do next when you notice you're worrying. So evaluate the need for alarm. Because remember, when that worry cycle goes, you get that, oh no, oh no. If that's your fight or flight, you want to calm that down. So you want to evaluate here, how much do I need fight or flight for this? Okay, so what's a problem you often see, Deena, that people are in fight or flight about? Test scores. Okay, so test score comes back. Either the kid or you is really unhappy with the test score. If you're a worrier, which most of us are, okay, I can talk about this stuff because I'm a very skilled worrier. You then do step one, notice, name, oh, I'm really activated about that. I'm really upset. I'm angry I spent all this money and there was only a 1-point increase. That won't do. How reasonable is it that you're feeling everything you're feeling? And then this step two is, will being in fight, flight, freeze help me figure out what to do about this? 99.9% of the time, the answer is no. The only time fight, flight, freeze is going to help you is if you're about to die in the next minute or so. That's the only time you want that in charge. Otherwise, not helpful. Okay, then the next step is exhale. This is what most people tell you to do when you're anxious, right? Breathe. In my experience, you get a lot more mileage out of the breathing if you do these first two steps first. Because the parts who are driving the activation, if they don't feel like you're getting it, and if they don't recognize, okay, I can see we'll be better off if we're not in fight or flight, the breathing's not going to get you too far. But breathing does help you reset the system. And then the T is take a step toward coping. Okay, and it's take a step toward coping. Most of the time, you're not going to solve it in that moment. But if you can shift away from that worry-activated state to a state where you have accessibility to that front part of the brain and you have access to the compassion, the clarity that you need, the connectedness that you need in order to work on this problem together with your child, you'll get a lot further. So, helpful shifts. I'm going to go through a bunch of these, and these are some ways to use this idea of shifting away from a worried perspective to more of this perspective of connectedness and mattering. So the first one is, instead of thinking about the big step, making this the priority, this is so huge, think about it more like a step along the way. So rather than the ultimate is the summit, we use this analogy of Mount Everest, which is why the base camp analogy here. But if you're so focused on getting to the summit, there's something called summit fever on Mount Everest. And when summit fever kicks in, climbers will make their oxygen deprived, their bodies are suffering, they will make decisions that are not in their long-term best interest to keep going for the summit. And a lot of those climbers have accidents on the way back, some of which are fatal. So being able to think about what's the next step, break it down, rather than this huge step, this is just one step along their journey. The other one, instead of worry, wonder. So instead of, oh no, all these things, wonder, I wonder, I think the example I'm using up here is that Sam is a student who has a pile of mail, hasn't even started looking at any of this mail, and the parent is upset. And instead of going, oh no, oh no, oh no, say, well, I wonder what's getting in the way. I wonder why Sam is not looking at them. Okay, instead of furious, blowing your stack. I was known for having really nuclear reactions over really inconsequential things like the garbage, okay? A lot of why I do this work is what I learned in the process of, recognizing this is not good. I wanted to help other people, other parents learn. But instead of being furious, get curious. But in order to get curious instead of furious, you need those steps. You need to regulate in order to get to curiosity. But if you're furious, there's probably a good reason for being furious. But take care of that yourself. I'm going to say it this way because I don't have a lot of time to think about it, but I have a part who's going, you're going to be really lectury when you say this, but when you find yourself being furious, take care of your own stuff away from your kid and don't make it their job to do something so you're not mad anymore. I did that a lot, and it had a cost. You don't want that cost. Instead of thinking about getting them to the summit, like I focus on the summit, they got to get up there, they've got to get into, one of these top 15 schools that are on the Forbes list, Instead of that, help them with the journey. And this is why we use the base camp analogy, because a good base camp leader recognizes they cannot make the climb for their climbers. When you're climbing Mount Everest, the climber's got to do it. Sherpas cannot carry climbers, even though some of them valiantly try, but when you're that deprived of oxygen, you can't carry a climber up there. But what a good base camp leader can do is really help manage what happens along the way on the climb. And base camp leaders who do that have more climbers who make it to the top, not only that, but go on to have a good life later. Okay, instead of we are looking at, parents who I've worked with will tell you, I always call them out on the we. You're not going. As much as you'd like to go, and I can remember looking, oh, that looks so much fun. I'd love to do that again. You're not going. You're not going. They're going. You're not writing the essay, I hope. It's their essay. It's their story. Let it be their story. Let it be their journey. Okay. Okay. Again, easy to fall into and reasonable that you fall into. There's not enough time. We're all suffering from time famine, right? So reasonable if this is happening, that doesn't make it a great thing. So instead of that, the dog greeting. This is my dog Luna, who when my boys are grown and out of the house, but when they come to visit, she literally jumps off the floor and does a 360 in the air before they come. And what a great way to say you matter to me. So if you can do more dog greetings during the day, and they don't have to be jumping in the air and doing a 360, but if you can do more versions, your version, make it your own of, I'm so happy to see you. Not, how was school? Like, I'm glad you're home. Happy to see you. Or maybe just a hug if you're a hugger and your kid welcomes that. But to pause and to really let that be your connection, your connecting moment before you get into, whatever ditches are necessary, because often they are. Instead of constant college talk, schedule a time per week. And I have a story about this, but I'm running out of time. So, is it okay, Deena? All right. So my middle son was the one of our three boys, for various reasons, went to private school. And one day he came home and announced that we were only talking about college on Sundays. And my husband and I were like really taken aback, but we paused and we talked about it among ourselves. It was one of the best things we ever did. We spent only on Sundays, that was the day we picked, for an hour, we would talk about college. He had support. I never read his essay. He told me what it was. It was about his ADD and carrots. He's a musician. And I was telling him he had to practice and that it wasn't all about raw talent. And he started thinking about raw carrots. And he said, part of me knew it was really important what you were saying, but I just kept thinking about raw carrots. And that's what his college essay was about. Still haven't read it, but he told me that's what it's about. Okay, so instead of thinking about this as securing a prize, something to win, okay, think about it more as, a good fit. Like where do they fit? What interest does this, satisfy? And then again, instead of evaluating, there is evaluation that goes on. So this is a little inaccurate, but when you see the instead of, you'll get it. You are evaluating. Okay? But instead of using that language, is this a good school or not? Hey, what do you think it feels like when the good schools are out of reach for almost every kid alive? And that's a fact. Okay? The good schools are a crapshoot to get into. The ones that are labeled good schools. There are plenty of schools that are great for kids that we don't call the good schools. So that's what this slide is getting at. Instead of evaluating, be descriptive. Oh, that school has the program you were looking for. That school has a lot of clubs that you liked. When we were at that school, you were really animated talking to the kids you met there. So more of that kind of talk rather than that's not a good school. Okay, and lastly, instead of this focus on fixing the future, like that this moment is going to define their ability to have a good life, just be with them. Be with them now. And remember, if you have parts that are going but, and you will, okay? Remember that slide with the green. Being with pays off far more than that piece of paper with the letters after your name. So the more you can be with during this process, you will need to do what Deena's going to talk about. That is part of the process. But if you can have this as a priority, even if it doesn't top the priority, if it moves up the list, your kids will be better off. So, thank you. So, and their life's just beginning. This is just the beginning for them.
I think, Susan, that was amazing. I always get inspired. Oh, I was worried that I'd left a piece of paper back there, but I have it up there. And I'm always so glad that Susan goes first, because I think she really sets us up for the type of mindset that I really hope parents have going into this process. Well, I've got to get the little clicker thing, right? Because it is really anxiety producing. okay, and this is me. And so I really understand it, that everybody comes and sort of wants the answers to this process, and there aren't any, but the way to think about it, and the way that Susan's presented to think about it is so valuable for the families that are working through this process. So anyway, I just want to say thank you to the Wilton Library and the Wilton Youth Council. I've been doing this, I think, for maybe 5 years, maybe, yeah. And I did it too when my daughter was going through the college process herself. And I felt all the things and did a lot of things wrong myself, even though this is like my one area of expertise, because it is such a trigger point. It is like they're all swimming in this pool where the stress just is part of life and everybody feels it. What I think is really valuable is to try to tweak your mindset. Try to think about opportunity. There are more than 3,000 colleges and universities across the United States. And we all hear about the same ones over and over. And many students will go to them. When I work with families, they put them on their lists, and there's no reason to exclude those schools. But I think that it's really important to know that there is so much beyond that. And just to sort of quell the anxiety around this, yes, this is what I do for a living, and I always feel like nobody needs to hire somebody like me in order for your kids to get into college. I mean, it is ironic because this is an industry now, but I think if your student is ready for college and wants to go to college, and you support them, who they are as people, and they go through all of the steps with a reasonable mind and reasonable expectations, then it's very, very likely that they will go to college, right? So just like, that is true, and that is what I see. And just keep in mind that there is not just one right college out there, there's not one list that's right, and there is not just one right path to college, okay? So those things are sort of an important mindset that I really hope that families understand when they go into this, and I like to remind families all the time about this. And the reason, there we go, I'm not as good at this, but one organization that I really like, this is Challenge Success. They are based at Stanford in the Graduate School of Education. They started there as a graduate project and have now expanded to tons of research that they do about what success is. So what they found is that, and you guys can look them up, college selectivity is not a reliable predictor of student learning, job satisfaction, or well-being. The things that do matter in terms of students meeting these things often are the fact that they're who they are as people, their background. So is there support for them during the process in applying for college? Do they have what they need, the basics? Do they have books? Do they have the necessities they need in order to study? Do they have a quiet place? Do they have an idea of what they want to study at college? So this doesn't mean that your 16 or 17 or 18-year-old needs to know exactly what they want to do, but it means, are you sort of supporting the idea that they have an interest that may not be about, well, what's the return on investment when you go to college? And The other thing that matters is whether they themselves are motivated to learn. Are they ready? Do they want to go to college, right? There's a lot of pressure to just sort of automatically you go through high school and then you go to college. And again, that's not the only way to do it. So I say that, and then here are the things that when students are thinking about a college where they will be successful, these things are the most important criteria. So when students are looking at colleges, are they looking at colleges where they will be able to be engaged and form strong relationships with professors and mentors? Are there people there that they will connect with administration? When I have students go to visit colleges, I always ask, tell them to ask, so when's the last time, you talked to the college president? Has that ever happened? I mean, a lot of places that never happens. Or who was the professor that meant the most to you your freshman year? If a student says, I don't really even know. Well, that's a good piece of information there about the relationship between professors and students at their college. The other thing that's really important is to have hands-on experiential learning. So is there a way for students to translate what they're learning in the classroom into actually applying it? And that is either through internships or long-term projects or through research. That's another thing that we see is really leads to a successful college experience. And then the last one is finding a sense of community. So are they happy there? Are they thriving there? Are they finding their people? These are the things that you want to think about when you're looking for colleges, and also when your student is thinking about colleges, to mention that these are the things that really lead to student happiness and success. So, and I'll just say a little caveat that we have an only child, and she wouldn't have listened to me at all about the college process, of course, right? Why would she listen to her mom? And she went through this process herself, and she told me exactly what she wanted out of her college. And I was like, gosh, but she wanted to find her people. She grew up in Ridgefield, and she didn't feel like she fit in. She goes to Oberlin College, which is in Ohio, and I found out, I really understood how happy she was there when she told me that I haven't brushed my teeth alone the entire time I've been here. She always had a group of people around her, and that was what she wanted. She's been extremely happy there, and I think about that one sort of explanation that she had about why she loved it so much. I mean, there are tons more, but she found her community there. Okay, so what things really matter in terms of creating a balanced college list? I'm going to just do it this way. So you want to think about all of those things that I just talked about and keep everything in mind that Susan talked about. And then this is the nuts and bolts here. So what does a balanced college list look like? Well, it looks like the things that you need to consider are what matters to you, right? And these are very general categories: size, location, academic rigor, academic offerings. And you may need to do research to sort of figure this out. Often when I work with students in New York City, they say, oh yeah, it doesn't really matter to me if my school has diversity or not. And I'm like, are you kidding? You just have no idea because you live in such a diverse community, but what would that they really can't conceive of what that might not mean, what it might mean to not have people that are different around them. So anyway, these are very basic pieces that you really need to dig into. Does the school have the majors that your son or daughter is interested in? How much experiential learning is part of it? Is there a balance of work and play? Do freshmen live in a different part of campus than the rest of students? Is there single gender housing? Is there Greek life, which can sometimes feel exclusive and sometimes be very inclusive to students? And of course, financial need and aid, right? Very important. It's really expensive. What I suggest is you're doing research, and I'll get to a little bit more about how to do that. And a balanced list is really only about 8 to 10 colleges. It's tons of work, right, to go through this process. There's applications. There could be several different foundation applications. The University of California have their own application. There's the Common application. Georgetown has its own application. Each application has a main essay, and then every school pretty much has supplemental essays that can range from like 3 to 8 or 9 essays per school. The colleges ask for resumes. The smaller colleges do interviews. There's visits to sort of determine what criteria matter to you if you can visit the colleges. So you really want to sort of try to, this is tons and tons of work, just this. And sometimes I hear people saying that their kids are applying to 20 colleges, and I just think that's bananas. I really urge you not to pressure your kids to do that, or not even to allow it. One way that you're going to find out what a balanced college list looks like is by looking on your college counseling platforms at your school. So I don't know if any of those sound familiar to you. In Wilton, kids have school links, right? And the reason why these are valuable is because, yeah, you're building this list of colleges based on what really matters to you. You have about 8 to 10 colleges. You need to make sure that your colleges are places not only that you're going to thrive at because they have these criteria and you're going to choose which ones matter to you, but also because that college is within range for you. That college is not going to be completely out of your range. And I'm not saying that students shouldn't dream about college or think about college and try their best and think about colleges that may be reaches. But you also want to have really reasonable expectations. And what College Links, what Maya Learning does, what College Kickstart does, is show you where your students' grades and scores are compared to students from prior years, where those students have applied to college and whether or not they've been accepted, deferred, denied. Okay, so it's a really valuable resource to sort of reset your expectations about where your kids' academics are versus where you might want your kids' academics to be or where they might want their academics to be. Okay, so this is sort of like, what are these three, what is a safety, a target, or a reach? When you're working on your college list, I say it's great to have high or likely schools, schools that, to have reach schools. And by that I mean schools that, maybe sort of at the end of your kid's academic range. But what I really always want to make sure is that every single college on a student's list is someplace where they would go if they get in. There is no point in having a school that's a safe bet that you know that you're going to get into based on your test scores, your GPA, and your class ranking falling above 75% of the admitted students if you would never go there if you were admitted, right? The schools have to be schools. Every school on your list has to be a school that you would want to go to. So a target school, and you should have a bunch of those on your list. Those are schools where the admit rate is probably, if I have that right, that's the less than sign, right? 25%. A student's test scores, GPA, and our class rank are close to the majority of accepted students. You're in the middle 50 percentile there. And then reaches. This is where most of the schools that you hear about are. They're reaches. They're all of the schools, or many of the schools, the Ivy League schools, they're the small New England schools, many of them. They can have admit rates. I think Stanford's admit rate this year was 6%. So that's 6 students out of 100 who are being accepted. And many of the Ivy League schools have similar admit rates, and so do Duke and Vanderbilt right now, which everybody wants to go south. So just keep that in mind, right? Those are really difficult schools for everyone. And even if you are in range for those schools, you have the grades and the scores, they're still only accepting 6% of their applicants. You can bet that many, many of their applicants have those scores. Okay, so this is about expectations. Okay, so you're thinking about what matters to you. You want to really think through your values, right? Do I really want a diverse environment? Do I want to make sure that I can study entomology? That's what I want right now. Do I want to have like a really active social life? Do I want things to be less difficult than they were for me in high school? I work with many private school students, and sometimes they're like, I just can't do it anymore. And I'm like, college is going to be easier for you, but let's find a college that's not going to be quite so draining, okay? How to avoid overwhelm? You can start with a list of around 20 colleges, and then you're going to narrow them down by the things that matter most to your family, that matter most to your student. So is that price tag? Is that a geographic restriction? Is that percentage of students that go to med school from this school? Is that an employment statistic? Or is that really about like, less tangible things? I want like a small enclosed campus. I want to be in a city. Whatever these things are, you want to really narrow them down so that you are prioritizing which criteria matter to you and making sure that when you get to those 10 schools, they all meet those criteria. It's really important to sort of look beyond just the school website, look beyond Maya Learning, look beyond the College Board. When I was in admissions at Columbia, these were our advertisements. We paid lots and lots of money to be on beautiful websites, and our own website, and I say this every year, the multicultural group of students with beautiful skin and white teeth underneath the deciduous tree that you see on every site, right? That's an advertisement. So you have to go beyond. I think it's really important to like ask specific questions to students and to alumni, to not just sort of like when you do a tour and an info session, just know, right, that it is, they're showing you the most beautiful parts. They're not necessarily showing you the border between the city and the school. They're not necessarily showing you all of the construction that's happening on one part of campus, right? So you just want to be very careful and dig deeply when you're looking at the colleges for the real information. Okay, so these are some tools that I think are really great. There's a million gajillion things out there, and it's very overwhelming. The FISC guide to the colleges is like my ultimate resource. I have this big, big book. Your kids might have it online. It's like, do you guys remember Ruth Reichel from the New York Times? When she used to go into restaurants like in costume so that she wouldn't get special service. So this is, nobody has to do that on the college campuses, but this is objective, right? There's nobody's paying the FISC guide to go, the FISC people to go and do this. And they give a very objective, very solid summary of each school based on the history of the school, the student body, what housing is like, what the social life is like, what the strongest majors are. And then they give overlaps, which mention schools that are similar to this school. So you can kind of, the research can be, you can continue on. And then there are some other resources. Steve Antonoff is a colleague. He has been doing this for, I don't know, maybe 40 years. This is his website. He has tons of lists, and he also has some questionnaires that families can ask, that students can use. Colleges That Changes Lives is a great resource. It's the colleges that you might not hear about as much as you do the Ivy Leagues or when you read about in the paper. These are usually small colleges that really focus on student success. And I strongly recommend, I think there's been several iterations of that book now. Creative Colleges is for students who are artists, who are dancers, who are musicians. Cool Colleges, that's another one about like students who can get amazing experiential learning experiences. The College of Atlantic is an example of a college like that. It's a tiny, tiny college up in Bar Harbor, Maine, where students, you know, like they participate in building their own, like they've built their own dorms there. They live with their animals. They cook their own food. I sent a botanical illustrator up there who was like perfect for. So there are lots and lots of colleges that you might not ever know about. And then there is a lot of guidance out there for students with learning disabilities. And the K&W guide is sort of the Bible, but there are a lot of other resources as well. You also, just like the FISC guide to the colleges, this is your other really objective resource, the Common Data Set. So the Common Data Set is what all of the schools need to report to be part of the National Association of Colleges. And that is admissions information, cost, tons of information that won't be interesting to you, but you can always Google the Common Data Set for Cornell, the Common Data Set for Ursinus. You can see what the real data is for that college, okay? So that and the FISC guide are really the most objective resources. Okay, and so here I said I was going to talk a little bit more about how to research. So you want to visit the colleges. During COVID, visits didn't happen. Students still went to college, but what it did create were virtual information sessions and tours. So now you can get on a college website for the most part and do a virtual information session and a virtual tour, right? But keep in mind, again, that these are advertisements, and be careful about what you hear from other parents around you, right? Oh, I know a kid who had a horrible time there. Oh no, that school is terrible. Somebody got their book stolen. You know, these are all subjective reports, so just keep an open mind about that. Also, when you do in-person visits, you know, if you've got a tour guide that your kid doesn't like, or it's a rainy day or snowy, just keep that in mind, that can really influence an experience, right? You might want to go back because sometimes kids have very negative experiences based on like sort of a negative connection with somebody that might not be representative of the school. So reaching out to current students and alumni from your own high school who attend, friends of relatives, and with good questions. And then doing a deep dive into the website academics through professor outreach and research. Your kid can email a professor in a certain department that he or she sees doing research in an area that they're interested, and connect with them and really find out, well, are there opportunities for me to do an internship? Do freshmen get to participate in this sort of research? Or are you gonna be there? You know, are you going on sabbatical? Like there are all kinds of questions that you can ask to professors that they'll really connect with high school students. And then you can also look for graduate school and employment statistics. You want to be careful with this too. They pretty much all say the same thing, which is 6 months after graduation, 96% of our class is in graduate school or employed. But dig deeper, where? Where are they employed? What graduate schools? Where? What are they doing? So other considerations, Learning disabilities. Does your son or daughter, does your kid have learning disabilities? These are questions that I'm always talking about with my clients. How is their emotional or mental health? I feel like I could restate Susan's whole presentation and it wouldn't be enough. But the whole point is to be a healthy, happy person, right? So if you drive yourself absolutely bananas and get sick because you're trying to get to the best college, it's not worth it, right? You have to be healthy to go to college. And then that leads me to this, like, okay, there's not just this one path, right? Do you want to take a year off? Do you want to go to colleges for 2 years and then stop? Do you need to do that? Do you want to do that? Just keep in mind that there are a variety of ways that students can do that. And actually, when you look at the common data set, it will tell you the percentage of students that finish that college in 4 years, in 6 years, and the retention rate, which means the percentage of students that return after first year, okay? So these are just some examples of colleges that I'm familiar with. I think I've got High Point on there twice, but for students with learning disabilities. There are a lot of great colleges out there that, by great, I mean they really meet students where they're at. And these are just some examples. There are more. And then for mental health, let me just see here. Did I skip something? Oh, yeah, I skipped. Okay, so one thing I just want to say about this is when you're looking for colleges for students with learning disabilities, you want to know that very basically, the law changes. You know, when you're up to age 18, the schools need to teach students how they learn, and that is their responsibility. And so under the federal law, students are entitled to accommodations that can support them in their learning. That all changes at the college level, where the law that takes over is the Americans with Disabilities Act. So what that law says is we have to make a reasonable accommodation under the law to educate students. Many, many, many colleges go way beyond that. These are some examples of ones that do. But questions that you might want to ask are, is there a liaison between the administration and professors? If my son or daughter or my kid has accommodations, do they have to advocate? Do they have to fight for them sometimes? Sometimes the professors are like, yeah, we don't care if you have those accommodations. If your son or daughter has learning disabilities and they're not comfortable advocating for themselves, that's a question about college readiness. But there are supports. There are supports on campuses that can vary from peer tutoring to professional tutoring to check-ins on students to, and the accommodations that your sons or daughters have had in high school. So I have a whole list of questions. If anybody wants to email me, I think my information's back there. I can give you a resource of questions to ask disability offices. There is a wall between the disability office and the admissions office, so you don't need to worry about asking these questions. Same thing goes for mental health resources on campus. This also became a bigger deal during COVID because everybody got very, very screwed up during COVID. This was like really terrible for our kids, right? Is that like a professional way to say that? Yeah. So these are two organizations that are on campuses, many campuses. So I would look for these two. And these are some examples of colleges that have strong mental health resources on campus. I love Macalester because at Macalester, they integrate therapy sessions into their first year experience. So there are many more colleges that are doing this. Denison also has an incredible wellness center that is also kind of really integrated into the orientation program and to the curriculum for students. So these are just some examples, and it's changing all the time. And I can also give you some good questions to ask about the level of mental health support on college campuses. And this is just the end. You know, this is like, you think back, and when, you know, if you gave birth to your child or adopted your child, there were all these resources out there. There was like what to expect when you're expecting. It was this huge milestone. Everyone was supporting you. And this might be the biggest, you know, step that you have right now since you gave birth. So just like recognize how it feels. It's not the only step, right? It's just one of many steps that your kid is taking. It's not the most important step. I say to my clients when things get really crazy, if you're the only thing, like nobody, I don't want you to have a baby right now, okay? Nobody should have a baby right now, but everything else is reversible. You can have a crazy, do poorly in school. You can need time off. You can not play sports. You can switch schools. There are a million different ways to do this. And so this is not the biggest decision. It feels like the biggest decision. It's not the biggest decision. There's going to be a lot of other decisions that your kids are going to make. And be okay with ambiguity, right? There is a lot of pressure. What are you going to do? What college are you going to go to? And what do you want to major in? What do you want to major in? And then the colleges, they all ask this question when you apply to college. And it's ridiculous because we know in college admissions that about 70% of students decide to change their major. We ask this question because we're trying to balance our class and make sure that we have enough Latin students to keep the Latin studies department going and classics departments going. We always know that we have enough business students, enough STEM students, but you should know that it's okay not to know. For the college process, they need to choose something, but they can change their mind. No one's going to go back to them and say, hey, you said you're going to be a business major and you're majoring in ceramics. Like, well, sorry, you're not going to graduate. That's not going to happen. Listen and be curious, right, about where your teenager may be happiest. I mean, this, again, just really echoes what Susan said. But to be curious about, our daughter said to me, I am done with New England. I'm done of the pressure in living in Fairfield County. I am not going to apply to any schools in this area. We were like, why is that? Because she was just like done, right? Why? Why, Ruby? Why? And she turned out to be very happy in the middle of Ohio. So anyway, I just say like, listen to them because they might know. Hopefully they will know. And if you have been sort of supportive all along, then your influence will also be important to them. Okay, I think that's it.